In Star Wars, the rebellion is painted as noble, selfless, and brave. But hiding in the shadows was a man who made them look weak. Saw Gerrera, the extremist they called reckless, the terrorist they condemned. And yet, time after time, his warnings proved true while the rebellion hesitated. Saw the Empire clearly. He knew it was not a system that could be debated with or slowly reformed. It was a machine built to crush all opposition. And machines like that cannot be reasoned with. They have to be broken. That was the truth the rebellion never wanted to admit. While Mon Mothma gave speeches, Saw was already planting explosives. While senators debated, Saw's men were ambushing convoys. While others hoped for peace, Saw prepared for war. His methods were ugly, but his results were undeniable. And that made him one of the most honest characters in the saga. What makes his story so powerful is the hypocrisy around it. The rebellion denounced him while secretly benefiting from the chaos he caused. His attacks distracted the Empire and bought the official movement time to grow. They wanted the rewards of victory without the blood on their hands. Saw carried that burden alone. And when the Death Star rose, the galaxy learned Saw had been right all along. His paranoia about kyber crystals, his warnings about secret projects, his insistence that the Empire was hiding something. All of it was vindicated in the worst possible way. By then it was too late. In this video we are going to explore why Saw Gerrera was right, how the rebels were wrong, and why his story may be the most uncomfortable but most important truth in all of Star Wars. Saw Gerrera's story is tragic because he was never truly wrong. From his earliest days on Onderon fighting alongside the Jedi during the Clone Wars, he saw firsthand that the galaxy was not going to be saved by polite debate or negotiations. The Republic had already rotted from the inside, and the Empire was the final stage of that decay. While the rebellion was forming committees and drafting charters, Saw was already bleeding in the mud, fighting stormtroopers, before most people even realised the Republic had died. He did not wait for permission to resist. He just resisted. The rebellion rejected him because they wanted to be respectable. Mon Mothma and Bail Organa built their movement carefully, worrying about alliances, appearances, and long-term stability. They needed senators to believe they were still the good guys. Saw did not care about optics. He cared about survival. To him, fighting the Empire was not about how you looked on the holonet. It was about making sure the galaxy had a future at all. And history shows that his instincts were not wrong. Take Jeddah as an example. Saw's militia operated there long before the Death Star fired. He warned that the Empire was doing something massive and dangerous. He saw the shipments of kyber crystals and the strange construction projects. While the rebellion hesitated to act, Saw was already investigating. And guess what? He was right. Jeddah was obliterated while the rest of the galaxy was still debating whether the Empire's superweapon was real. That hesitation cost thousands of lives and validated Saw's paranoia. And paranoia was not a flaw, it was armour. Saw knew the Empire infiltrated everything. He assumed spies were everywhere because spies were everywhere. The rebellion liked to think of themselves as a clean, noble resistance, but Saw had no illusions. He trusted no one fully, and that distrust kept him alive, far longer than most insurgents ever survived. His health broke down before his will did. His suspicion was his only weapon against an empire that thrived on deception. Even the Jedi recognized Saw's determination. Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano trained him and his partisans during the Clone Wars. That experience hardened him. He learned warfare from generals, not politicians. And that training gave him an edge later when he turned those lessons against the Empire. The irony is that Saw learned from a Jedi who later became Darth Vader, which makes Saw's obsession with fighting tyranny even more haunting. He was shaped by both the best and the worst the galaxy had to offer. The rebels saw Saw as unstable. They whispered about him being dangerous to their cause. But think about what that really means. He was too dangerous for a rebellion fighting against the most dangerous regime in galactic history. That sounds less like a flaw and more like someone telling the uncomfortable truth that no one else wanted to face. Saw was not palatable to senators and diplomats, but he was necessary to survival. Andor drove this point home perfectly. Luthen Rael did not trust the official rebellion either. He needed people like Saw because Saw was willing to get his hands dirty. Luthen even admitted the rebellion needed men who would burn their souls to ash so others could live in the light. Saw was that man. He was the one willing to cross the lines others were too afraid to even approach. And while the rebels condemned him, they still quietly benefited from his existence. Saw Gerrera was labelled a terrorist. But the funny thing about that label is that it only comes from the perspective of the powerful. To the Empire, he was a terrorist because he refused to bow. To the rebellion, he was a terrorist because he made them look bad. But to the enslaved miners of Onderon or the occupied citizens of Jeddah, he was a liberator. He was the only one fighting back when no one else would. That is why his movement kept attracting desperate recruits, even when he was sick and dying. Because he offered action instead of promises. The rebellion's strategy looked noble on paper, but in practice, it was almost suicidal. They tried to balance ideals with effectiveness. They wanted to inspire hope, but not terrify allies. They wanted to hit the Empire, but not look like criminals. It was a tightrope walk that left them paralysed for years. Saw threw the rope away. He knew that wars are not won by appealing to the conscience of tyrants. They are won by breaking tyrants so completely they can never rise again. Consider how the rebellion handled the Death Star project. They spent years debating whether it was even real, so already knew it was happening. His intelligence network spotted the shipments of Kyber crystals and the massive secrecy around construction. But because his reputation was so toxic, the rebellion ignored him. They treated his warnings as hysteria, and by the time they took action, it was almost too late. Saw's obsession could have saved them years of preparation. Instead, his voice was sidelined until it was too late. And let us not forget how the rebellion treated allies like Saw. They used them when convenient and discarded them when they threatened the brand. Saw's men on Jeddah did the dirty work of disrupting Imperial convoys and stealing intelligence. But when Mon Mothma wanted to present the rebellion as clean and respectable, she distanced herself from him. That is not moral purity. That is politics. Saw was sacrificed on the altar of public relations. The irony is that the Empire did not care about respectability. They crushed senators in the same chambers that once promised democracy. They dissolved the Senate with a single order. Palpatine did not worry about optics. He worried about power. Saw understood this long before the rebellion did. That is why he built cells that could not be tracked or negotiated with. He knew the Empire would never allow space for compromise. And that insight made him far more realistic than the leaders who dismissed him. Some fans criticised Saw for being too ruthless. But think about what he was up against. The Empire enslaved entire planets. They obliterated Alderaan without blinking. They built weapons designed to kill billions at once. Against that scale of evil is a bombing of an Imperial convoy really unjustifiable. The rebellion acted like morality could be balanced on a scale. Saw recognised that the scale was already broken. Even Cassian Andor illustrates this divide. He admitted he had done terrible things for the cause. Assassinations, sabotage, informant killings. All the things Saw was accused of doing too often. The difference was that Cassian operated quietly, under official rebellion orders, while Saw did it openly. The actions were the same. The difference was branding. And that makes the rebellion's condemnation of Saw more about image than principle. The sad truth is that Saw's extremism was a mirror the rebellion did not want to face. He exposed the hypocrisy in their claim to be noble warriors of freedom, because deep down they knew they were using some of the same tactics. They just dressed them up in better speeches. Saw was the raw version of what they were pretending not to be, and that is why he was rejected. And if we step back and look at the arc of the war, the rebels only won once they abandoned restraint. At Scarif they risked everything in a suicidal assault. At Endor, they unleashed total destruction on the Imperial fleet. These were Saw Gerrera strategies, all in all or nothing. By the end, the rebellion fought like Saw. They just never admitted it. That is the cruelest twist of Saw's story. The rebellion proved him right not with words, but with their actions. They won the war only by embracing the very extremism they once condemned. Saw Gerrera's legacy is complicated because Star Wars rarely rewards characters who see the world too clearly. Heroes are supposed to be hopeful. They are supposed to believe in light over darkness. Saw never had that luxury. He lived through too much death to believe in hope as a strategy, and that made him one of the most realistic characters in the saga. His body became a metaphor for the cost of truth. Every prosthetic limb, every wheezing breath showed the toll of uncompromising resistance. He was broken, but unbent. The Empire could shatter his health, but never his will. That image alone is more powerful than 1,000 rebel speeches, because it shows what the fight really cost. The rebellion kept its leaders polished for the cameras. Saw showed the scars that others tried to hide. And in many ways, his partisans carried his torch even after his death. Groups across the galaxy used his tactics of decentralization and sabotage. They refused to fight clean because they knew the war was never clean. Saw became a legend among the desperate, a ghost that haunted the Empire and a warning to the rebellion. You cannot fight tyranny politely. You cannot win by half measures. That lesson outlived him. What makes Saw's story so important is how it reframes Star Wars itself. The saga often simplifies conflict into good versus evil. But Saw complicates that. He reminds us that real wars are messy, brutal, and ugly, and that sometimes the only way to defeat monsters is to become something monstrous yourself. That is uncomfortable to admit, but it makes the story feel real. Andor leaned into this perfectly by showing Luthen Rael echoing Saw's worldview. Luthen admitted he would never live to see the sunrise of the New Republic. He sacrificed his soul so others could enjoy victory. That is Saw's philosophy in a nutshell. Victory without compromise. A victory purchased with personal damnation. And the fact that the show presented that view as necessary proves how right Saw was all along. The rebellion liked to think of themselves as saviours, but Saw knew they were executioners. Someone had to be willing to swing the blade. That is why his death on Jeddah is so powerful. He did not run. He stayed to face the Death Star knowing his life was already over. It was not martyrdom for glory. It was exhaustion. He had fought too long and knew the war would outlive him. But his warnings, his methods, and his philosophy lived on in the very people who once rejected him. Even Rogue One itself proves Saw's point. The rebellion would not have gotten the Death Star plans without his network. Jyn Erso only found Galen's message because of Saw. The entire Battle of Scarif, which turned the tide of the war, only happened because Saw was right about the threat. Yet his name is barely remembered in the official canon of the New Republic. That silence is the final insult. He gave everything, and history erased him. And that erasure is telling. The victors always rewrite the story. The rebellion painted themselves as the noble underdogs, but buried the truth that men like Saw did the work they would not admit to. That is why his story matters. Because it tells the uncomfortable side of rebellion. The side where morality bends and survival takes priority over honour. The side that history tries to forget.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.